it's really not astonishing that he's going to trial. He's been to trial now twice. He's lost both of them disastrously. He testified in both of them. He apparently made a bombastic and terrible impression. He probably upped the civil award against himself by the bad impression that he made on the jurors. In one of the cases, it was a jury trial. And so I think he probably hasn't learned his lesson too much, but he's trying to thread the needle where he doesn't infuriate the jury and he somehow appeals to them.
You know, obviously we find this stuff kind of baffling, very interesting in this country. Can you just explain the kind of technicalities here? Because this isn't about hush money in itself. It's about allegations of how this money might have been paid. Can you explain what the issue is here in this trial?
Well, this criminal trial of former President Trump that's about to start in New York City involves falsifying business records. And the idea is that in order to reimburse his fixer attorney, Michael Cohen, for paying off this porn star, and so that the world wouldn't know, and so his wife wouldn't know, and so that campaign regulators wouldn't know, Trump supposedly knew that it was being booked as a legal expense. It wasn't a legal expense. Michael Cohen wasn't doing any legal work for this money, but he got paid the $130,000 that he paid off Stormy Daniels, and he got paid enough money that when he reported it as legal expenses, there'd be enough to cover the U.S. taxes on it. Cohen is going to say he explained everything. There's going to be some other evidence that everything was explained to Trump. Trump is going to rely on the fact that they can't prove, he'll say, beyond a reasonable doubt that, number one, he knew it was a violation of state law. He's in state court. If he didn't know it was a violation of state campaign law, it's just a misdemeanor. And then he's going to say he's not guilty of anything because he didn't have the intent to commit a campaign violation. He just didn't want his wife to know that he'd been catting around. She was home with a newborn. He didn't want her to know of his moral failings and that he was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of having the criminal intent to convict him.
Now, Donald Trump denies what Stormy Daniels has said. He does admit making the payment. And he said, I think it was a couple of years ago, he said the agreement was used to stop the false and extortionist accusations made by her about an affair. What do you think? I mean, this has already been quite difficult in that he's been unhappy with the judge and some of the judge's relatives in this case already. How do you think he will conduct himself in this trial?
I think he's not really unhappy with the judge or the system. I think he feels like he should make those motions so he can tell his base, see how unfairly I'm being treated. I actually think that judge is very objective. I think he's not a bad draw for Trump. I think he'll be fair to Trump. I think Trump is worried, of course, that it's going to be a Manhattan jury. He thinks it's going to be, larded with liberals, the kind of people who live in Manhattan. But actually, Manhattan even votes 30% for Trump. So he's likely to get a couple of Trump people to come in on the prospective jurors. And then his lawyers and the district attorneys are going to try very hard to end up with prospective jurors who are not going to see the case too biased against Trump or too biased for Trump. And of course, that's the art of jury selection. And, the prosecution needs all 12. So I think there's three scenarios that are likely. Number one, Trump gets convicted of the felony. Number two, he only gets convicted of the misdemeanor because he didn't know beyond a reasonable doubt it was a violation of state campaign financing law. And number three is he has a hung jury. One or two people won't vote guilty on anything. He has to come back for a retrial. The thing that I think is very unlikely is that he'll be acquitted. That is, that all 12 will vote not guilty of everything.
And this is a kind of vexed question, something again over here we find difficult to understand. That I mean, even if he is convicted, one of the outcomes that you suggested, this doesn't stop him from it doesn't conflict with his desire, his campaign, his eventual possibility of him being president again.
Well, the Constitution here is written and it has specific disqualifications. If he'd been found guilty by the Senate of the impeachment, that's not a criminal conviction. Had he been found guilty of that, had there been more Republican senators to vote that he should be, convicted of the articles of impeachment, they would have moved on to disqualify him. That would have disqualified him under the Constitution. But other than that, if you're over 35 and you're a natural born U.S. citizen, you can serve as the president. You can have a felony. The joke is that he could even be in jail. He could be meeting at Rikers Island prison with Macron. That won't really happen. But of course, that's the ridiculous aspect. If you want to say that he's not disqualified for a felony, he couldn't vote for himself, but he could serve as president.
Just finally, I know I asked this earlier, and there's a lot to talk about really in this, but he's known for being very flamboyant, very theatrical. He says what he thinks. Is that what you were expecting from him in this trial, or do you think he'll tone it down at all?
It's a bit astonishing that he's going for a criminal trial that could end up with him being in prison, but it's really not astonishing that he's going to trial. He's been to trial now twice. He's lost both of them disastrously. He testified in both of them. He apparently made a bombastic and terrible impression. He probably upped the civil award against himself by the bad impression that he made on the jurors. In one of the cases, it was a jury trial. And so I think he probably hasn't learned his lesson too much, but he's trying to thread the needle where he doesn't infuriate the jury and he somehow appeals to them. And I think his charm, his charm seems to work in some of the swing states and with his base. But, I'm from New York myself, and I don't get the supposed charm that he has, but he's going to try to charm the jury. He may even testify. If Michael Cohen goes in pretty well and the trial otherwise goes poorly for him, he might just, Hail Mary, take the stand. I'm a criminal defense attorney. And, I've called a client of mine in desperate circumstances, and in a couple of cases, they made a very good impression. I mean, it is tough when you look the jurors right in the eye, if you have any kind of charm or persuasive ability, and you say, I didn't do it. I was worried about my wife. I didn't want my wife to come home and scream and throw pots and pans at me, and this was not going to help with my wife. I didn't want her to find out. Can you understand that? I didn't want my wife to find out. Campaign schmampaign, right?
Okay, David. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
You mentioned Donald Trump. I think it would be good to talk about what's in store today. He'll be the first former US president to face a criminal trial. This all relates to the allegations about money sent to Stormy Daniels. Just in a nutshell, what is the crux of the trial about?
The crux of the trial is that he had falsified business records as head of the Trump organization in terms of trying to hide off this payoff to Stormy Daniels to prevent an affair from coming into light at the height of the 2016 campaign. And so he is going to argue that he did not know about this and that this was done by his minions. The government is going to argue the opposite. And so I think the broader significance is that this could be the only trial of Trump that happens before the election. So you've had, he's charged in 4 separate trials, and this might be the only one. And if he is convicted, then there's many Republicans who will not want to vote for him because of, he will be convicted felon, and that may go beyond the pale for them.
I mean, it's fair to say Donald Trump tried extremely hard to delay this to after the election. We know, though, extraordinarily, whenever he goes through a sort of a procedure, a legal one like this, sometimes it bolsters rather than hurts his campaign. Do you think this criminal trial is where that is slightly different?
Yeah, he's never faced the prospect of actually being convicted of felony charges, and so everything has been more political, or things he can say, oh, these are corrupt prosecutors, but it's harder to, Americans are still pretty certain and respectful of the jury system, where if you're found guilty, you're viewed as guilty. And so here you have like 4 in 10 Republicans who say these are very serious charges. And so a lot of these people are supported Nikki Haley in the primary, and he has shown no interest in wanting to expand his voter base. And so I think this could be Biden's saving grace, because you could use this in ads saying, does America really want a felon in charge of our nuclear codes, for example?
Yeah, well, precisely. Talking about consequences, if he's found guilty, what could he be facing?
Jail time for certain, but then he would appeal, and there would be pressure on Biden to if he's reelected in November, if Biden's reelected, to pardon Trump in the interest of national unity, because it would be pretty unprecedented for the leader of the Republican Party to be put in jail. Just like how Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon.
And
And
what's
so
incredible is even if he was guilty, maybe 4 years in prison, that doesn't bar him from the presidency.
it's always possible that if he loses in November, he could run again in 2028. He would be pretty much older then, but this is a person who, even though he's only a few years younger than Biden, a lot of Americans believe does not have the age or cognitive issues that they believe Biden has. And so that is everyone ages in a different way, but there would be some procedure almost to try to have Trump not win again. So I don't think or not run again. So I think that Democrats would not allow Biden
I
to
think we hear that and think, gosh, that sounds like even more legal process ahead. Daniel, thank you so much.